Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. It's me, Big Head, and we back on the block. Today we're going back to 2016, and we're going to talk about a time shortly after the flood, the great flood of 2016 that demoralized our state. So the area that I'm from was severely hit also with the flood. I lost everything in my house. My house flooded. I lost the contents in my house, and I lost all my vehicles. So I was put in a situation where, like many other people in our area, we're having to deal with a situation that we don't have any experience with, right? So as we're trying to understand what's going on, the challenges involved, and trying to rebuild and assess the damages and try and get a ride, if you will, because I didn't have any vehicles at the time. Our chief, Carl Dabadie, who was chief of police in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at the time, and Chief, I hope you're listening. I don't know the dynamics of how all this occurred, but I will tell you this. Normally when events of this nature happen, we're summoned to come to work, and we're made to work 12-hour shifts. And what that does is it limits the time you have to take care of your own personal business. Well, in this particular situation, Chief Dabadie was compassionate enough and understanding enough to know that we were experiencing something that was very challenging and demanding on our personal time. So he allowed those of us who flooded an extended amount of time off to try and regroup and take care of our business. So Chief Dabadie, thank you very much for what you did and allowing us to stay home, allowing us to take care of our own personal business. Because like I said, normally we're out and about, our spouses, our kids, everybody else has to pick up the slack at home. But in this particular situation, Chief Dabadie came through like all great leaders do. So thank you, Chief Dabadie. Now, fast forward a little bit. As the flood occurred, I told you I didn't have any vehicles. So I had to borrow my friend Chris Rogers' truck. His truck stayed with us for about 2 weeks, and it was the only thing we had to drive as we were trying to regain some vehicles from the ones that we lost. You know, vehicles were hard to find because a lot of the dealerships flooded also. But my boy Chris Rogers came through, so I got to use his Toyota Tacoma, which I never would buy a Tacoma because I'm kind of big and those trucks are small. But let me tell you, that was a hell of a ride. We called it Trusty because Trusty got us everywhere we needed to be. So fast forward, it was time to go back to work, and I still didn't have a unit. Now, here's a funny story about my unit. I didn't have a unit just prior to the flood because I had dropped it off at our fleet management division. The fleet management division, after the flood, about a week after the flood, they called me and they said, hey, your unit was at a dealership and it's flooded, so, it's no longer in play. And I said to them, listen, I don't know why you think it was at the dealership, but y'all never brought it to the dealership. It's still on the back lot right where I parked it weeks ago. And they were kind of perplexed when I told them this. So they actually went out there and surveyed the lot and found that the car was actually there. So for one time, I was happy that this one fell through the cracks because even though my car was still broke down, it wasn't lost to the flood. Now, fast forward, I was heading back to work and I didn't have a unit. Now, Baton Rouge suffered a ton of losses on units, so we didn't have spares, and a lot of people didn't have units. So they were having to drive their personal vehicle back and forth to work, which is what I was going to have to do. Now, we only had a couple of spares at each district, and it was important that the people who handled the calls, because I was a sergeant at the time, we needed them to have units to drive. That way they could handle the calls for service. Well, I talked to Chris about this. Now, Chris Rogers, my good friend, he's a helicopter pilot. And he understood that it would be easier for him to drive back and forth to work because he didn't really need his unit during the day because when he was activated to handle calls or to assist, he would be flying. And other than that, he spent time at the office. So he said, man, why don't you just take my unit? That way you can drive back and forth to work and you can patrol in it. And, his unit was an unmarked unit. It was a Dodge Charger, black tinted windows, and it was a kind of a dark metallic gray color. So it wasn't a patrol vehicle, so I could go to work, patrol, and I could be sneaky for a little while. And the reason I say that is because whenever I'm in the area, people know when I'm at work. They know when Big Head's at work. There's several officers that they kind of keep up with your time that you're at work and, where you at and stuff like that. And one of the other notable officers that had that kind of influence was Bruh Stupid. You can believe one thing, the bad guys knew when he was at work, what he was driving, where he was at, and if he was on the move, they spread the word. So that's a shout out to you, Bruh Stupid. And on a side note, if he's listening, time to go 10-10 at Chili's. So off to work I go. I'm driving an unmarked unit. I get into the 2nd District Highland Road precinct area. And for the next couple of weeks, I use Chris's car. Well, let me tell you about a couple things, and that's why we're going to call this The Ride. Chris allowed me to have his car. And first of all, I drove to the corner of East Harrison and Maryland where Cashing Out Entertainment was doing a video shoot. We talked for a minute. I gave them a shout out. They gave me a shout out. We did a little video because he was on Facebook Live. I hit the 4 down, which represents the bottoms from the South, which is where we were at the time. And the video went viral on Facebook. When I say viral, I just meant locally viral. It got several thousand hits. But it was pretty funny. I told Chris, I made your car famous, man, because nobody knew that it was his car. But when they put it on Facebook, I made sure everybody knew. So I babied this car for a long time, man, because I knew one thing. Chris had allowed me to use his personal vehicle, and I can do 8 podcasts on how I kept that vehicle from getting flooded and all kind of other disastrous events that occurred with that vehicle. As I'm driving this unit one particular day, I'm driving south on Highland Road around LSU's campus. There's a car driving erratically, and he's doing some weird things, and I really don't understand what's going on. So eventually, Chris's car had lights, but it was an unmarked car, but it had lights above the windshield, like the interior windshield that would flash out, and they had some lights in the grill also. So eventually I had to say, hey, man, I don't know what this guy's doing, but I need to just kind of let them know they're being watched. So I popped the grill lights. I was just doing it for effect, not to make any kind of violate or stop or anything. Well, at this particular time, the car decides it wants to take off. So it accelerates at a high rate of speed. There's no other traffic in the area at the time. And as he got to the next red light, I had turned my lights off because I had no intentions on chasing this fool, because I had no idea what he was doing. And, at that point in time, we were trying to, as a city and as a police department, we were trying to reestablish ourselves, and everybody was trying to do what they could to help each other to recover from this historically tragic event, right? So I wasn't worried about chasing this guy. So I had turned my lights off, and eventually he just stopped. He stopped at the red light and quit running. Well, I knew something was up because he ran for a long enough time to make me think that he was definitely wanting to run for a reason. What the reason is, I don't know. So I called one of my officers on the radio and tried to find out where she was at, just in case she was close. I would let her come with a marked unit and stop them. So she actually was relatively close. So I stayed behind the vehicle. They never tried to drive fast again. They turned right off of Highland Road, went to Nicholson Extension, and then eventually went to Nicholson Drive. Well, once they hit Nicholson Drive, she was able to catch up with me, and I told her to go around me and, activate her lights and sirens, at which time she did. At this particular time, the individual in the car, we had no idea who it was. The individual in the car decided it's time to run again. And now that they had a marked unit behind them, they were definitely ready to run. So a pretty extensive chase ensued, and it lasted, from what I remember, just a few minutes. But in the big scheme of things, a 3 or 4 minute pursuit is a long time. Well, this particular individual, because he passed through LSU's campus, we notified them. Other people that were monitoring our frequencies, some other agencies, both federal and state, were monitoring. So they actually jumped into pursuit also. Now, I'm second car, but as the regular units come, I start letting them filter in between me, because there's no reason for me to be involved in a pursuit in an unmarked vehicle when there's marked vehicles. Even though, yeah, it's fun to have the chase, I figured I would let them jump in, and that way they could, manage the situation in the marked units, which is per policy anyway, it's protocol. So eventually this individual led us up to the levee, And if you know anything about the levee, there's a concrete portion on top that you can drive on, and it's used for walking and bike riding and stuff. Well, I don't remember the exact area that we entered, but where they entered, they went into a grassy area, basically an open field, if you will. Now, my units followed this individual through the field, but I started thinking, I don't know anything about this field. They could have holes, they could have ditches, and the grass was so high that you couldn't tell. So if you traveling at a high rate of speed, which my officers and this individual still were, you liable to hit something and tear your car up, right? And remember I said I'm in Chris's car, not mine. So old veteran cop, he ain't fixing to tear his unit up or somebody else's unit going in an unknown area, especially with the high grass, because you can't see anything in front of you. All you see is the grass, right? So as they went into the area, it was clear that this individual was going to run into the tree line pretty soon. So I drove on top of the levee on the concrete portion, and I went north of where they were at. And what I figured is I would intercept him if he bailed out and ran from them, because if he ran south, they would have caught him. He would have had to run north. So I put Chris's car on top of that levee, nice and secure. I walked down the levee in an attempt to locate him if he decided to run from them. Now you know where I'm at, so let me take you back down to where the chase is. I can see everything occurring because I'm at an elevated position, right? And I'm listening on the radio to everything that's occurring. Now, my officer, and I'm picking on her right now, I'm not going to tell you her name. She's in another part of the country doing good for herself. And I don't want to embarrass her, but I will at some point in time. She's actually behind calling a pursuit. She does a good job calling a pursuit. Well, as she's calling a pursuit, she says that a Hispanic male bailed out of the vehicle. He jumped the fence and he's heading down the bottom of the levee toward the water. Now, everybody who's monitoring, including me who can see, and the officers behind her who can see, and the ones just monitoring the radio, we're trying to figure out, what the hell are you talking about? There ain't no fence on the levee, right? So for whatever reason, this imaginary fence popped up, and she said he jumped the fence and bailed out. Now, later on, we clarified with her that, hey, there was no fence. Where did that come from? She gave us some BS explanation, but in the end, she had an imaginary fence for this guy to jump. So they're down there. They're not actually chasing him because he went into a heavily wooded area, and it was really hard to traverse. And where I went, I realized that he couldn't make it as far as I did. He would have to be pinned down within a smaller radius. So being the supervisor, I went back to where the chase ended, and I left the car up there on the levee, nice and secure. As I'm heading back down, I'm realizing that the grass around our units are catching on fire, as well as the individual's vehicle who bailed out. So another one of my officers were close by, and there was probably 4 or 5 of them down the levee trying to catch this guy. He wasn't actively running, so it was more of a search at that point, trying to contain him in the area. Well, I got one of my officers to get the fire extinguisher from his car, because as I told you, mine's up on the levee. Chris's car's up on the levee, nice and secure, so I didn't have his fire extinguisher. Well, we put out that fire, and we put out another fire. Now, the grass was about a foot and a half high. So what happened is, and this occurs a lot whenever you have vehicle pursuits, your brakes get hot, the undercarriage gets extremely hot. And when these officers pulled into this grass, it hadn't rained in some time, and the grass was really dry. So it was the perfect storm. Vehicles in the grass started catching on fire. We were able to put a couple of them out. So I walked down to the edge of the levee, and I told everybody, hey, y'all need to come move your cars. We keep having grass fires up here. Now, we only got a certain amount of fire extinguishers, and this grass is so dry that it's trying to spread quick, but we were able to contain it. Well, one of my officers that was down there, the lead in the chase, she threw us her keys, and we went and moved her car, got it out of that area. There was another agency that was in the area that was helping her search. And I told him, hey, man, you need to come move your vehicle. It was an unmarked SUV. You need to come move your vehicle, man, because we're having grass fires up here, and I don't know if you're going to make it. And he said, yeah, I'll be there in a second. Now, they were focused on this guy catching him. I'm not going to take anybody's enthusiasm away. I could care less if we catch this guy. I could care less about any of this, really. We got bigger fish to fry in the city, and like I said, I didn't want to curb their enthusiasm. So I'm like, y'all keep searching if you want, but we got to get these vehicles moved because we're going to be in trouble. We had already summoned the fire department because we realized there were so many cars there that eventually we were going to have a problem. Well, the next thing that happens is the unmarked unit from the assisting agency. I said, hey, man, you need to come now. I'm serious, man. Your car is catching on fire and it's fixing to go up in flames. And he said, I'll be there in a minute. I said, I don't think you have a minute. So I walked back toward his car. And at that particular time, the flames came from underneath the car and it started kind of engulfing the front end of the car. So I looked in this car and I was going to try to save whatever I could. I opened the front door at first, but then the flames started coming up through the engine area and through, I could hear like a bunch of sizzling noise through the actual dashboard. So I'm like, I'm not fixing to get blown up trying to save nothing out of here. So I shut the front door, opened the back door, and, because it was still nothing, none of the flames had reached the back. I looked in to see if there was anything of value, and I noticed this big black case. So I said, let me grab that. And as I did, the car became not totally engulfed in flames, but it became pretty severe that was the only thing I was going to attempt to move because I'm not going to get burned trying to save equipment. But I did save that one box, and eventually the car caught fire, and it was totally engulfed by the fire. And that one box was the only thing that was saved. And, the guy who came up, whose unit it was, he's like, man, I can't believe this. And I'm like, well, here's what you need to believe. I did save this one case. I'm just trying to make him feel better, which ain't really making him feel better. Because at that point, reality sets in. Damn, I done lost my unit. Now I got, as Ricky Ricardo said, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. As all this was going on, I look up to the top of the levee and I see the fire department arrive, but I also see Chris's car sitting up there, nice and safe and secure. The fire department comes down. I'm taking video of the car going up in flames just because I got nothing else to do because I'm not fixing to try and put it out, because I have nothing to put it out with. So as the firemen arrive, I see that they're coming. They have some of their gear on, but they don't have it all on. And one of them don't even have his helmet on. And I asked the fireman that was close by, I said, hey, man, why those guys don't have their equipment on, man? Their car's on fire. And I said, I heard it sizzling, and then I heard some pop noises, like it's fixing to explode, man, but they walking right up on it. He said, the car's not going to explode. And I'm like, okay, being that I done seen a lot of TV shows, lots of cars explode. He said it wasn't going to explode, and the noise that I heard was the tires popping. And I can't argue with him because I'm not a fireman, right? I said, well, I'm just going to stand back. I was standing by one of my other officers, and I said, I'm just going to stand back here and watch. And I hope my video don't get him getting blown up over there. And it didn't. The car, they were able to put the fire out. They did their job. But I was still amazed that they did it without all their equipment or gear on. Like I said, I'm not a fireman. I don't know. But as this whole situation came to an end, we kind of huddled up and we talked about what was gained and what was lost. And the first thing that we did was pick on my officer and let her know that there is no fence on the levee, right? I'm just going to give you a generic version of it. We cracked jokes on her for a while. But then the next call I make is to my friend Chris. And first of all, I send him the video of that on fire. And I tell him that we involved in a big pursuit down here just to kind of let him know what's going on and kind of raise his level of anxiety because he's going to think that his car is probably in trouble. So I sent him the video. Then I called him and I said, hey, man, we lost a lot of cars down here. They caught on fire in this grass fire, man. It was a pursuit that I was involved in. And he didn't really say nothing from what I remember. I said, but look, just know this. I took care of Trusty. That truck never got flooded, never got anything wrong with it. And now I took care of your unit because all these other units that were compromised, yours is sitting on top of the levee, on the concrete, out of harm's way. So not only did I save his vehicle because he was nice enough to let me use it, and I understood the significance of him losing that unit, right? Not only did I save his unit from any harm, I also made it famous on the corner of East Harrison and Maryland at the video shoot. So Chris, if you happen to be listening, and you better be listening, boy, thank you for being my friend, and thank you for allowing me to use that unit. And know that I went through extreme measures to make sure that the ride that you gave me was one that was going to come back in the same condition it left. That's right. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.